Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Can you believe an HOA tried to reserve my private land for their summer bash? They sent out flyers to 200 homes, booked a band, and spent thousands in dues money, all for a party on property they didn't own. They expected me to just let it happen. What they got instead was a fence, a sheriff's report, and a front row seat to their own downfall. So I need to tell you guys about the summer that my backyard almost became the venue for 200 people in Hawaiian shirts eating catered barbecue, all without my knowledge or consent. Some background first, because this story makes no sense without it. I live on what old-timers around here call a donut hole property. Back before the whole area got developed, my place was a working farmhouse sitting on about 2 acres of flat land. Then a developer came in, bought up everything surrounding it, and built one of those cookie-cutter subdivisions with the beige houses and the decorative mailboxes and the HOA with color-coded trash day schedules. But they couldn't touch my property. My grandmother had owned it, then my parents, and when they retired and moved closer to family out west, they sold it to me. Clean title, no encumbrances, no easements on record, nothing. Just a 2-acre plot with a farmhouse, a large flat meadow out back, and a gravel driveway that's the only access point to the whole thing. The subdivision was built literally around me. My driveway feeds out onto the main neighborhood road, and from there you'd never even know the meadow existed unless you were standing on my property. It's flanked on all sides by houses that are part of the development, but the land itself, mine. Every square foot of it. Here's the part that matters. I am not, and have never been, part of the HOA. I predate the development by about 60 years. The HOA was formed when the subdivision was incorporated, and since my parcel never changed hands as part of that development, I was never subject to their CC&Rs. I don't pay dues. I don't vote at meetings. I'm not bound by their rules. My property is completely separate from theirs. Most of the time, this isn't an issue. The neighbors are fine. I've always been the kind of person who tries to be easygoing about small stuff. For a couple of years, I've let the neighborhood kids wait for the school bus at the end of my driveway because it's a safer spot than the main road. I've waved and chatted over fences. I've never caused trouble. I think that easygoing attitude got misread somewhere along the way. The HOA president is a woman I'll just call the president because she very much acted like she thought the title came with executive powers. She's been running the board for about 3 years, and from what I can tell, she treats it like a full-time job. She organizes everything. Block parties, holiday decorations, landscaping votes, you name it. Some of the neighbors appreciate it. A few of them have told me privately that she's exhausting. I'd had one real interaction with her before all this happened. About a year and a half ago, she knocked on my door and told me that the North Meadow, which is what she had apparently started calling my backyard, needed to be mowed to a specific height to match community standards. I was confused. I told her I was not part of the HOA, and that she had no authority over my property. She looked at me like I had said something deeply unreasonable and then told me she would follow up with me in writing. The follow-up she sent me was an actual citation notice formatted like an HOA violation, complete with a fine amount. It listed the violation as unmaintained natural vegetation inconsistent with community standards, and tacked on a $50 fine. The plant they cited was a wild bergamot, which is a native wildflower and actually a protected species in our county. I wrote back, told her I was not subject to HOA enforcement, and included a brief note about the plant being legally protected. I never heard back, the fine was never paid, and nothing came of it. I figured that was the end of any real friction between us. I was wrong. In late May, I walked out to get my mail and found a glossy, full-color flyer in my mailbox. It was an announcement for the HOA's Summer Kickoff Gala, a catered event with a live band, a bouncy house, and lawn games. A full outdoor party. I was already noticing the graphic design work when I got to the venue line. It said the event would be held at the North Meadow, with access through the gravel drive off the main road. I stood there in my driveway rereading that line a few times. They had put my property on a flyer. They had distributed this flyer to 200 households. They had listed my private land, accessible only through my private driveway, as the venue for their party. and at no point had anyone contacted me. I got inside and pulled up the neighborhood Facebook group. I'm not active in it, but I've been a member for years just to stay loosely informed. Sure enough, there was a post from the president about the gala. She was going on about how excited she was, how beautiful the natural setting would be, and how grateful everyone should be for the generous donation of space for the event. Donation of space. I had donated nothing. I had been asked for nothing. I had agreed to nothing. I sat with it for a day before I decided what to do. My first instinct was to be reasonable and assume it was some kind of clerical mix-up. Maybe the president had looked at an outdated map and actually thought the meadow was HOA common space. Stranger things have happened. So I sent a calm, direct message to the HOA board email address explaining that I believed there had been an error, that the North Meadow was my private property and not part of the HOA's holdings, and asking them to confirm so we could sort out the venue situation before any deposits were made. The response came the next afternoon, and it was not what I expected. The president replied herself, with a tone that made it very clear she did not consider this a conversation between equals. She told me that the developer's original site map showed that area as shared green space. She said the board had already paid deposits for the caterer, the band, the rental equipment, and the bouncy house. Then she told me to make sure my gate was unlocked by 8 in the morning on the Saturday of the event so the equipment trucks could get through. She said this like it was a settled matter. Like she was doing me a courtesy by informing me of the access time rather than asking anything at all. I read that message probably 4 times. Then I closed my laptop and went and made coffee and thought about what I actually knew versus what I needed to verify. Here's what I knew. My property was mine, I had never been part of the HOA, and no one had my permission to use my land. But what I also knew was that in disputes like this, what you know matters a lot less than what you can prove. The president had mentioned a developer's site map. I had never seen that map. I needed to see it, and I needed to have something better to counter it with. So instead of arguing back over email, I took a day off work and drove to the county assessor's office. If you have never been to a county assessor's office to pull property records, let me tell you, it's not a glamorous experience, but it is an incredibly satisfying one when you're trying to win an argument. The staff there are usually pretty helpful, especially if you come in knowing roughly what you're looking for. I asked for the official recorded plat for my parcel and for the surrounding subdivision. The clerk pulled both. My property was recorded as an independent parcel. The plat showed the exact meets and bounds, the acreage, and the history of the parcel going back to before the subdivision existed. The subdivision plat, which was recorded years later, showed all of the development parcels, including the designated common spaces. The common spaces were clearly labeled and clearly delineated. My meadow was not among them. It was not even adjacent to any designated common space. The boundary lines of the HOA's common areas stopped well before my property line. There were no easements. There were no shared access agreements. Nothing. I paid for certified, stamped copies of both documents. The county clerk stamped them with the official seal, and I walked out with a folder that was basically a physical representation of my entire legal argument. When I got home, I drafted what I want to call a final warning, though I kept the language pretty measured. I sent it certified mail to the HOA's registered address and emailed it to the board at the same time. I told them I had the official recorded plat documents showing my property boundaries. I told them no easement or shared use agreement existed. I told them I did not authorize the event and that if anyone set foot on my property without permission, it would constitute trespassing. Then I said that if they wanted to discuss this further, they could contact me, and I included my number. Nobody called. What they did instead was post in the Facebook group. The president put up an update about the gala and mentioned in the most passive-aggressive way possible that due to some concerns from a neighboring property owner, they might need to have security present to make sure the event went smoothly. She framed it as a precaution against a difficult neighbor. She never mentioned my name, but anyone who knew the layout of the neighborhood knew exactly who and what she was talking about. I was apparently the villain now. Before the event had even happened, she had seeded the narrative that I was the disgruntled party trying to ruin the fun. I read that post and felt something settle in my chest that I can only describe as clarity. This was not going to be resolved by talking. She was committed to this. The deposits had been paid, the announcement had gone out to 200 families, and she had publicly staked her reputation as a community organizer on this event happening in my meadow. Backing down would cost her too much face, so she wasn't going to back down, which meant I had to make sure that when Saturday arrived, I was ready. The Friday before the event, a large rental truck pulled up to the end of my driveway in the early afternoon. I was working from home and I watched from my window as the driver got out and looked at his delivery slip, then looked at my gate, then looked at his slip again. I walked out to the driveway. I told the driver there seemed to be some confusion. He had a delivery order for 200 folding chairs in a large event tent, and the address matched my property. I told him clearly and calmly that I was not the person who had ordered this, that this was private property, and that I had not authorized any deliveries. I also told him that if he left equipment on my property without my consent, I would treat it as abandoned property. He was a reasonable guy. He was not happy about his situation. He made a phone call. About 10 minutes later, a golf cart came buzzing down the road, and the president pulled up in a state I can only describe as controlled fury, wearing a smile that was working very hard. She told me I was creating a problem for the whole community and that these deposits were non-refundable. She told the driver to just leave the equipment, that this was a misunderstanding that would get sorted out. The driver looked at her, looked at me, and then made another call. He was on the phone for a few minutes, then he looked pretty uncomfortable and said his company's policy was to get authorization from the property owner for delivery. The president told him that she was authorizing it. He pointed out with impressive patience that she was not the property owner. There was a back and forth that went on for a while. Eventually, the president told him to just do it, in a tone that made it clear she was not used to being told no. And the driver, under clear pressure and probably wanting to just finish his route, left the chairs and the tent on my lawn. I went inside and called the sheriff's non-emergency line. I explained the situation. I told them I had a certified copy of the plat showing my property boundaries, that I had sent written notice that no event was authorized, and that equipment had now been deposited on my land without consent. The dispatcher took down the report and a deputy came out within about 2 hours. I showed him my documents, showed him where the equipment had been left, and he took a report documenting everything. He also noted the items that had been left. That report was going to matter more than I realized at the time. I spent Friday evening making a few calls and doing a little research. I found a local fencing company that rented temporary chain link panels on short notice and asked if they could have a crew out early Saturday morning. They said yes, and we worked out the logistics over the phone. The crew showed up at 6:30 in the morning. By 8 o'clock, there was a solid chain link fence running across the full width of my driveway, which is the only way in or out. I had signs zip-tied to the fence every few feet. Private property, no trespassing. This property is not part of the HOA. Several of them. Clear, large text, unmistakable. I set up a small folding table just on the public road side of the fence. On the table, I put two things. First, a stack of the certified copies I had gotten from the county assessor. Not originals, just clean photocopies, enough for anyone who wanted one. Second, copies of the certified letters I had sent to the HOA board, showing the dates and the delivery confirmations. Then I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in a lawn chair about 20 feet back from the fence on my property, with a camera set up on a tripod recording everything. By 9:30, the first guests started arriving. They came in waves, families with kids, couples, neighbors in Hawaiian shirts carrying covered dishes and lawn chairs. They walked toward my driveway, saw the fence, and slowed down. A few of them walked up to the signs and stood there reading. Some of them picked up the papers from the table. I watched from my chair. The caterer arrived at around 10. It was a full-service catering truck, the kind that's basically a kitchen on wheels, and behind it was another truck carrying the bouncy house. The caterer got out and walked up to the fence and looked at the signs. Then he looked at the line of neighbors standing on the road who also couldn't get in. He pulled out his phone and made a call. The president arrived at about 10:15. She came fast, on foot, practically marching down the road from her house. She pushed past a few neighbors and came right up to the fence. She was purple. I mean that more or less literally. She was wearing a yellow sundress and her face had gone a shade of red that was heading toward purple, and she told me to open the gate immediately. I told her there was no gate, just a fence, and that she was welcome to explain to me what legal authority she had to access my private property. She told me I was ruining everything, that the deposits were all paid, that there were children who had been looking forward to this for weeks, that I was being a terrible neighbor. I told her I had given her multiple written notices and had sent a certified letter. I told her I had been to the county assessor's office and had the plat documents that showed exactly where my property line was. I told her she could look at the copies on the table. She did not look at the copies on the table. A few of the neighbors did. I watched a man in a floral shirt pick one up, look it over for a few minutes, and then walk over to talk to the person next to him. Then that person picked up a copy. Word started moving through the crowd. The caterer had been standing near his truck during all of this. When the president walked back toward him and told him they were going to figure this out, he told her he was not willing to cross a fence with private property signs to set up catering on someone else's land. He was very polite about it. He said his company couldn't take on the liability. The bouncy house truck driver was already backing out. The president turned back toward the fence and told me I was going to pay for this. I told her that actually, given the sheriff's report from the previous evening, she might want to think carefully about that statement. There were maybe 100 people standing in the road at this point, in the heat, in their Hawaiian shirts, holding covered dishes of potato salad, looking at a chain-link fence and a folding table with papers on it. The band had never even shown up. I found out later they had called the night before and couldn't confirm the venue, and when nobody called them back, they assumed the event was canceled. The president tried to rally people a few times. She suggested they could hold a modified version of the party on the road, or in the small park at the other end of the development. But the caterer was leaving. The bouncy house was gone. The chairs in the tent were still on my side of the fence, completely inaccessible. I watched a group of about 6 neighbors standing around a copy of the plat map, passing it back and forth and talking. One of them looked over at me and I gave a small wave. He looked pretty unhappy, but not at me. One neighbor I recognized from the bus stop situation walked over to the fence and spoke to me in a low voice. He said he didn't know any of this was the case. He said the board had told everyone that the owner had volunteered the space. I told him that I had never been contacted, that I was not part of the HOA, and that I had the records to prove it. He looked at the fence and then back at the road full of people and just shook his head slowly. The event was over before it started. By 11 o'clock, most of the neighbors had drifted back to their houses. The catering truck was gone. A few people were talking in small clusters on the road, and from what I could hear through the fence, the conversation was not going well for the president. Someone was asking where the $5,000 in dues money had gone, since the deposits were apparently non-refundable. Someone else was asking why nobody had verified the venue before sending out 200 flyers. The president was nowhere to be seen. The tent and the chairs were still sitting on my lawn, untouched, because nobody could get to them. I called the rental company that afternoon and told them their equipment had been left on my private property without authorization and that I needed it collected. They were out the following morning. I'm told the HOA was charged an emergency retrieval fee on top of the original rental cost for the same reason. The week after the event was quiet from my end, but apparently pretty loud on the neighborhood Facebook group. I wasn't posting anything. I didn't need to. The neighbors who had picked up copies of the plat map were doing plenty of talking on their own. There were questions about the board's due diligence. There were questions about the finances. Someone had apparently done the math and figured out that the total cost of the failed event, including non-refundable deposits and the emergency retrieval fees, came out to somewhere between $5,000 and $6,000 of HOA funds. Dues money. People's money. I got a call the following Wednesday from someone I didn't recognize who turned out to be a neighbor I'd never spoken to. She introduced herself as a longtime resident who had been at the gala attempt and who had since been talking to a lot of other people in the development. She asked me a few questions about the property history, and I answered them the same way I would have answered anyone who asked. She thanked me and said she would be in touch. She didn't explain what she meant by that, but she didn't need to. About 3 weeks after the failed event, I got word that an emergency HOA meeting had been called. I was not a member of the HOA and had no standing to attend, but I was invited as a guest by 3 separate neighbors over the course of 2 days. I accepted one of the invitations. The meeting was held in the community room of the clubhouse, which was a small beige building near the main entrance of the subdivision. There were probably 60 people crammed into a space meant for 40. I sat near the back. The president was seated at the front table with the rest of the board. She looked like someone who had spent 3 weeks being asked uncomfortable questions and had not enjoyed the experience. The meeting started with regular business items that got through quickly because everyone was clearly waiting for the real conversation. Then a woman near the front raised her hand and said she wanted to discuss the allocation of funds for the gala event. The president tried to explain that there had been an unforeseen issue with the venue. Someone called out from the back asking what kind of planning process allowed a $5,000 deposit to be paid on a venue without confirming that the HOA actually had the right to use it. The president said they had relied on the developer's original documentation. A man who turned out to be an actual property attorney said that the developer's original documentation had been a preliminary site plan, not a recorded plat, and that anyone who had done a title search would have found my parcel's recorded boundaries in about 20 minutes at the county assessor's office. The president said the board had been operating in good faith. 3 people raised their hands at once. What happened next took about 45 minutes. A formal motion was made for a vote of no confidence in the board president. The motion was seconded. There was discussion. Several neighbors spoke about the general pattern of the president overstepping on various matters, not just this one. Someone mentioned the fine she had tried to issue me over the wildflower about a year and a half earlier, which apparently I was not the only person she had done that kind of thing to. People had stories. They had been waiting for an opening, and this was it. The vote passed. The president did not resign on the spot, but I heard from one of my neighbors a few days later that the HOA's insurance carrier had been notified about the incident, that there was a question of whether the board's actions constituted misappropriation of HOA funds, and that the president had been given a choice between resigning or facing a formal complaint that would follow her to any future HOA board she tried to join anywhere. She resigned. The HOA's insurance company reached out to me shortly after that. There was a discussion about the damage to my lawn from the equipment that had been left on it, the tire tracks from the rental truck, some torn-up turf near the driveway entrance. It wasn't catastrophic damage, but it was real and documented in the sheriff's report and in my own photos. We came to an agreement on a payout that covered restoration costs and then a bit more for the overall hassle. It wasn't a fortune. But it was something. I hired a landscaper to come out and repair the turf damage. They did excellent work. While they were out there, I asked them about putting in a flower bed along the edge of the meadow near the driveway, right in the area where the bouncy house had been sitting when it got dropped off by the rental truck. They thought it was a great spot for one. Good sun exposure, flat ground, easy to maintain. So that's where the flower bed went. I picked out a mix of native perennials. Black-eyed Susans, coneflowers, and a healthy section of wild bergamot right in the center. That last one was intentional. The new HOA president reached out to introduce herself about a month after everything wrapped up. She was low-key, professional, and apologetic about the whole situation without being over the top about it. We had a short, pleasant conversation. She asked if the bus stop arrangement for the neighborhood kids could continue, and I said, of course, it was never a problem. She thanked me, and that was that. I still wave at my neighbors when I see them. Most of them wave back. A few of them have come over to properly introduce themselves since the gala incident, which I take as a sign that people feel like they can now, without it being weird. My property is still my property. The fence that blocked the driveway got returned after the weekend, and I didn't need to install a permanent one. Turns out a chain link rental, some printed signs, and a folding table with copies of public records was enough. The wild bergamot is blooming now. It's actually beautiful. I didn't plan to use it as a statement, but I have to admit that every time I look at it from my porch, knowing exactly where it's sitting and why, I feel pretty good about how everything turned out. Some people mistake patience for weakness. Some people see someone who's easy to get along with and assume that means they're easy to push around. And sometimes those people organize a catered event with a live band and a bouncy house on land that was never theirs to begin with. That's usually when they find out the difference. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Background. I joined this Japanese-based company a few years ago as a production assistant. I wasn't assisting anyone in production. I was the only American, the only one fully fluent in both languages. Still am, still looking for a better line of work. So I ended up helping everyone else in some fashion or another. Well, I also had to do my own work, of course, but when things shipped behind schedule, it was made out to be my fault. I helped our shipping manager send things out and receive them, count, quality check them, weigh the boxes, palletize them, etc. Our sales manager, the man himself in question, constantly asked me to double-check his emails, so he sounded more natural and professional, and even had me get involved on numerous occasions to help him save face or placate customers. Event. From the time that I started, we'd been struggling to keep time because of inventory issues. These issues were both because our customer didn't keep accurate numbers, and neither did we, not just for the parts they sent us for assembly, but also for the boxes we used to package the order before shipping. Boxes I used and only I used. Boxes I was not allowed to order, but had to ask Mr. Sales Manager to order for me. Well, he would forget to order them, and then I'd remind him. and he'd forget again, only ordering days later. It happened enough times that our customer finally demanded we count up our inventory. I made an Excel sheet, made it legible in both English/Japanese, color-coded areas of concern, and I also added everything we used in the office, from boxes only used by shipping, to gloves, to the parts from our biggest customer as they were demanding we count. Everything got counted, everything was put in that document, and I made sure to include a field of when it was last counted. Result: suddenly we're making good time and getting ahead, and I don't have to worry about boxes. Now, this entire time, Mr. Sales was working on a 20-page document that proved our president didn't do his job, trying to report him to the JP Home Office and get him fired. My two coworkers got a glimpse of it and saw there were sections on all of US too, bad-mouthing our work, trying to make it seem like only Mr. Sales was on the up and up. Finally, the JP parent company sends someone. This guy is, unknown to all of us, the son-in-law of the company owner of a family-owned and run company, pretty common in Japan. Well, only I and our shipping manager learn of this since we actually talk to the guy, but Mr. Sales likes to treat him like a goof and poke fun at him. This guy JP sent to us, he carefully plans meetings with us for while Mr. Sales is out of the office, and interviews all of us about what's been up at our USA branch. Our late shipments come up, and my pattern of shipping late and insulting our biggest customer with my laziness. There's also reports of me being on my phone too much, preoccupied watching videos or listening to music and not working. I start pulling out the emails and the inventory I was told to create. I show him the inventory history and my emails asking for Mr. Sales to do his job from before it was made. I show him the ship dates and the differences before and after I made the inventory file. Fallout. A friend of mine in Japan is suicidal, and I'd lost contact with him a few times. I decide to go to Japan and help him out. Try to live there, but at best I have 6 months of savings. That means I have to leave the company. I know this guy from JP is going to arrive and all Mr. Sales' delusions of being USA branch president will die, but I couldn't be there to see it. So I went to Japan, spent my 6 months successfully. Friend re-entered college to chase his dreams instead of being a dead-eyed salaryman, he's on the mend, and returned to the US a few months ago. I get in contact with the company and they rehire me. Now that I'm here, I learned Mr. Sales quit shortly after I left, but not before he aired every last thing he had told me would stay between us and take all but a literal dump on my desk. I check my old inventory file. He zeroed it out. The company has been shipping late again, hired a new guy to do my job that's been getting parts returned to fix errors numerous times, something that only happened to me once. Do they want me to fix any of that? No. Here's a book of local businesses. Call them, drum up customers. Oh. Okay, can do. Thanks for the paycheck for doing something so easy that won't ever work, I guess. The next one is an entitled people story. I have few apartments that I rent out, and today, one of the tenants moved out. So I went over for the cursory inspection and key handover and paperwork. This guy has been an exemplary tenant over the years, and today was no exception. The place had been cleared out and cleaned, and checking off the boxes was a formality. When I got there, the only thing left there was the internet modem. This particular apartment had had a family member living in it years ago, and I had arranged the internet for the place. When this tenant moved in, let's call him Moose because he looks identical to the Moose from Archie Comics, just for the sake of simplicity, we agreed to just leave the internet as and add an extra $50 to the rent. No problem. This was back in 2018. Assuming the next tenant can look after whatever they want with respect to internet and cable and phone bundle and whatever, I planned to cancel the service and return the equipment. I unplugged the modem and cables and left it on the kitchen counter while we reviewed the unit and the paperwork. While looking around, his phone buzzed a few times and rang once. He, very politely, unlike many people these days, ignored all of that while we were walking and talking. But then, there was a knock at the door. Weird. I'd arranged a viewing of the place while I was here, but how did they get in? Nobody buzzed them in, and there's no way to get to the right floor if you're not buzzed in. Moose opens the door, but it's not the people coming to view the place, it's the next door neighbor. Let's call her Veronica. She comes in and there's a bit of, oh, you're moving out, where are you going, blah blah, chit-chat, but she's eyeing the modem sitting on the counter. Eventually she says something like, would it be okay to plug that back in? I was actually using it. Using what? The internet? The Wi-Fi? Yes, indeed. Turns out, back in 2020, at the start of the pandemic, her office shut down and her job turned into full-time work from home. And at some point early in the pandemic, she had some internet issues and asked Moose if she could hop on his Wi-Fi, which had a clear signal to her place until her issues were resolved. Sure, no problem, he said at the time. Fast forward more than 5 years, and it turns out she long ago canceled her own service and is full-time running her office, smart TV, and phone off my/Moose's Wi-Fi, and now that the plug got pulled, she wants it back. She's offering to give Moose money. But please, plug it in. It's Friday. I need to work, and I need it over the weekend. I'll sort it out on Monday. Moose doesn't know what to say. Neither do I, to be honest. The truth is, Moose never noticed it. It's high speed and clearly enough for everyone's devices, and the monthly contract lands in the middle of the month for some reason, so it's actually paid for the next 2 weeks. In the midst of that, someone buzzes from downstairs. It's the people for the viewing. Archie and Betty, I guess. They come up, and then oddly Veronica and Betty know each other. They go the same Pilates studio and often run into each other. Oh, it'd be so much fun if you move in. We could go to class together, yada yada. Veronica offers to take the modem, plug it in at her place, and promises to deal with Shaw Cable. To just take it over since it's all working. I'm not sure it works like that, and you can't just take the equipment next door and have it work. Let me try. Okay, go ahead. She leaves with the modem, having agreed to deal with Shaw and return the hardware if needed, which actually saves me a lot of hassle. So she leaves, and a few minutes later texts that it's working and thank you so much. I spoke to Shaw and explained the situation, canceled the service effective end of the billing cycle. Veronica has a couple of weeks to set up an account, and they'll either just move the existing equipment over to it or she can swap for new hardware. Either way, I'm done with it. So, I don't know. Entitled person? She made a comment at one point which has to have been tug-in-cheek because it's so outrageous. Something like, oh, come on, please leave it on, don't be cheap, haha. Yes, I'm possibly the cheap one while you've been getting my free Wi-Fi for half a decade. Anyway, thank you for watching.